I'm Jesper, and I'm just some guy living with my family in Denmark. What I like the most about life here is the freedom. I never set an alarm clock to wake me up, and I don't lock my car. My workshop is unlocked, even though I probably should lock it, because I have been able to get a lot of tools over the last 2 years. This is my story of how I got thrown into woodworking and YouTube. It's also how I got to be my own boss, how I got tools, and also more than 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. I didn't see that one coming. Back in 2019, I discovered that I had an abandoned horse barn that I didn't use for anything. I think my wife was pretty happy to get me out of the house, so she encouraged me to get the few tools that I had organized so I at least could find them. I was really a knucklehead, but I cleared out the barn and I started looking for my tools. I did spend some evenings out there, but to be honest, I wasn't too motivated. But then, in late February 2020, something happened. I can't explain it any better than I had an epiphany of inspiration that told me to stop watching too much news and to start going outside and doing something new. My day job also fell apart, and I really started to think about maybe I could use my hands to make a living somehow. I didn't have any cash on hand because up till then I pretty much spent all I had every month, which is really stupid. I had a stack of Euro pallets, and I heard of people using pallet wood, so I started to figure out how to take them apart. Some of my first pallet wood projects were these boxed wine stands. After some experimentation with design, I made 4 like this. I gave 2 away and I sold 2 of them. And I thought that was it. But boy, was I in for a surprise. I soon ran out of pallets, so I started pulling over to stores that had pallets laying around. That worked for a while, but I took my pallet hunting to new heights by contacting local factories. Out of the 5 that I contacted, 2 of them said yes, that I could come and grab as many pallets as I wanted. And one of them even had a lot of shipping boxes and other wood, which basically built my workshop. One of the people that I gave a wine box holder had a party, and I started getting calls from the guests. They wanted one of these for themselves. It turns out that a lot of people drink boxed wine in Denmark, and I started making a lot of these. I still make batches of them today. I really just got crazy creative and spent most days outside just making stuff from pallets. In the evenings, I was watching other makers on YouTube and trying to learn woodworking stuff. At some point, I got the idea to try filming a video myself, but I was also insecure about what I could bring to YouTube with all these great makers there already. Eventually, I got the idea to make a garden table from one single pallet, and I grabbed one of my kids' Canon cameras and filmed the whole thing. That eventually became my first and not very good video on my new YouTube channel. But it was also the start of a new adventure, and I felt a lot like Alice in Wonderland before she got to Wonderland and was just falling down the rabbit hole. All woodworkers need tools, and this upcoming woodworker had no cash on hand, so he had to go and ask friends and family for their old tools. I got an old miter saw and pillar drill. I found some hand tools at garage sales that I restored. My dad even gifted me his old compressor and nail gun. I made work tables out of pallet wood and plywood from shipping boxes, and even a weird vise in a workbench made from a cable reel. To be honest, I had no clue what I was doing at first, but I learned a lot every day just by doing stuff and watching other makers on YouTube. In the beginning, I saw pallets everywhere, but then I also started to see logs and blown over trees everywhere, and I figured if I could somehow mill those logs into slabs and lumber, there could be a business for me. This was heavily inspired by Matt Cremona, who literally mills up big logs in his backyard. I found a small sliding bandsaw for sale, but I didn't have the cash to buy it. But I had a friend who wanted to mill his own lumber, so instead of paying a sawmill to do it, my friend and I chipped in and bought our own sawmill. I even paid my share with money I made from the future milling of other people's logs. And let me tell you, with the high demand for slabs these days and the uber high wood prices, I'm still making good money milling logs for clients. Plus I get to mill my own wood. So it's really a win-win. The word must have spread locally that I was some sort of woodworking maniac, because I started to get calls from people wanting to give me wood. Sometimes it's tree that fell in storms, other times it's old wood from demolitions, and even a whiskey distillery offered me their old barrels. At this point I'm still just going crazy with making stuff. I had this big poplar that needed to go down, so I figured why not do it the good old-fashioned way, with an axe. It's kind of also a picture of my whole journey here, because my big win hadn't really landed yet, but I surely put in the work. Late in 2020 I had about 300 subscribers, but that was about to change. So, with my sawmill up and running, I had more types of wood than just pallet wood and cable reels. When people think of woodworking, they often think of an indoor shop with tools and dust collection. But what if you don't have space for a shop or money to fill it up with expensive machinery? Some of my first woodworking tools were these tenon cutters and some auger drill bits. I made a lot of woodworking projects outside with these and with my axe and chainsaw. It's very easy to use a tenon cutter, and you can easily attach legs to benches, stools and tables with it. I made these benches from a green poplar log and treated it with wood burning. With all the pallet dismantling I had done up till now, I had a considerable amount of pallet blocks just laying around. And I figured it could be a good idea making something out of them. That turned out to be a really good idea a little later. And speaking about how far I am in my woodworking journey, I don't know yet. I was just grinding away, making pallet wood projects and milling up logs, and also starting to figure out what customers were willing to pay money for. I started going more into making tables, and one of those tables happened to be the Pallet Blocks coffee table. I recorded the making of it over the summer of 2021, and I decided to put all I knew about editing at that point into the video. I uploaded it in October 2021. It didn't get too much attention at first, but enough so I at the end of the year could celebrate getting 1000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. That also meant I got into the YouTube Partner program and started to earn money from the views on my channel. I started to direct my maker focus to bigger and more unique pieces, for the simple reason that I thought they would make more interesting videos, and also because they sell for a higher price than the small pallet wood projects. And I'm not gonna lie, putting out a lot of small items is also a lot of work. You need to sand and stain and sand in all the small cracks and corners. But there is also more risk involved in making bigger projects. For bigger projects I needed a bigger work table, so I made one from recycled wood and I filmed it for a video. I was afraid that no one wanted to watch yet another Workbench YouTube video build, so I really tried to make a work table that no one had ever seen before. And also on the video side, I tried to include as much story in the video as possible, and trying to include all the weird stuff going on inside my head. The video got an okay amount of attention when it was published in February 2022, probably my best performing video so far. But I still struggled with handling YouTube and my woodworking business at the same time, because recording and editing videos takes time away from actual woodwork in the workshop. I enjoyed making videos and I felt being on YouTube helped me get approved by clients. But then I also needed cash to buy tools and pay for expenses, so I almost decided to stop making videos. But then in April 2022, the pallet blocks video started taking off. I guess YouTube had figured out who to show the video to. And those people apparently liked the video because they also subscribed. And because I linked the Workbench video in the pallet blocks video, smart, people started watching that one too. I was honestly expecting the views to stop any minute, any day. But I was suddenly at 10,000 subscribers and YouTube started paying monthly for those views. I went on with my strategy of making bigger and more unique items and making videos of the ones where I could see a good story in the video. Over the summer of 2022, I sold some big projects to customers, and together with YouTube money, I was able to upgrade to better tools. I was also able to trade some work for tools, so my little horse barn workshop and sawmill operation is looking better and better. And YouTube just sent me this for passing 100,000 subscribers. I even got recognized by Ruby Monaco, who made me the ambassador in Denmark. What I really appreciate every day is that I wake up whenever I wake up. And then I make coffee, because coffee solves everything. And then I decide if I should go straight to the workshop or if I should start the day doing some editing on a video. I pretty much decide what I want to build for clients in the workshop or around the house for my wife. I like to work a lot, but I'm rarely stressed out. I really like chatting with other makers.
Jesper? What is that, a species of tree? No, never heard of it. Let's try.
Jesper Makes? Nah, doesn't ring a bell.
I thought you were the Danish pallet Viking.
Interesting guy. Danish.
Apparently I'm not that famous yet. So the big tree here. It took me all day to axe 2/3 through it, and then it got dark and I had to stop. And that night a storm came and took the tree down. In the wrong direction.
May I suggest checking the weather forecast before you start hacking down trees with axes or drilling down trees with drills?
Come on, James. I would never try to take down a tree with a drill. You know that.
Can you drill down a tree with a drill?
Well, I guess there's only one way to find out.
G'day, mate.
So this is my friend Mark. I always trust his opinion.
That's a big mold. A lot of tape.
Yeah, I made a mold out of my workbench.
That's a lot of epoxy and
Yeah, and...
a lot of pallet blocks, mate.
But hey, come on, Mark. Will it work?
From the past, I would say maybe.
This project started as most projects, with my wife asking me to get rid of a bunch of really old pallets and also do something about my office situation. I got the more or less brilliant idea to make myself a new desk. And while I was sawing down the old stack of pallets, I also got another idea that I'll get to in a moment. I would like to be able to stand up at my future desk, so I remembered that I got an email from a company that makes height adjustable legs. I called them and I sold the idea that I was making a beautiful walnut and black epoxy table video. They were absolutely game and sent over not just one, but 2 sets of height adjustable legs. Did you know that the characters in Winnie the Pooh are based on psychological disorders? I wonder what kind of disorder I suffer from, because I continued on this path and I called my epoxy resin supplier and told them the exact same story. Apparently walnut and black epoxy is a magic key that opens doors, because shortly after I had 39 kilos of deep pore resin standing in my workshop. The reality of my project started to dawn on me finally. And I remember I helped a family member saw up a walnut log a few years back. Maybe there's a chance I can get some of the leftover pieces. And to my luck, I got away with a few smaller chunks, not exactly a big walnut desk yet. So I'll have to get creative. I started making the form for the desk. The general advice is using melamine boards, but I looked at the prices and thought, geez Louise, there's gotta be a cheaper way to make a form. So I went looking around the house and I found some plywood sheets. I realized I might not have enough wood in this full sheet of ply, so I got an idea that would make any professional woodworker cry. What if the top of my workbench could be the bottom of the form? I realized it was kind of a gamble, but at the moment I felt a bit like Tigger, who would likely dive headfirst into a project like this, perhaps without fully considering the potential challenges ahead. So off I went, transforming my hardy workbench into a Christianal epoxy mold. I cut plywood sides, and then I got going with some cork to fill up all the small screw holes in the bench top. I then covered the whole surface with tape, because tape with release agent on is apparently the best way to be able to separate the form from the cured epoxy. Guess I'll see later. To make the form completely leak-proof, I put cork between all the boards when I assembled them. I also put cork at the bottom surface before pressing it down on the tabletop. I also corked all the inside seams and also all the outside seams. And I left the cork to dry for a few days. If this thing leaks, I'll have epoxy in all my routers and bits in all the drawers below. Suddenly I got this visitor. I guess word got out in the 100-acre woods about a honey-like substance being used. Sorry to disappoint you, Mr. Bumblebee, but you are too early for the Rubio Monaco treatment. Once the form was spotless, I coated it with mold release. A brainwave struck me while I was dismantling those old pallets. My friends call me the Danish pallet Viking, and I never really got to be a fan of conventional river tables. I'm not just going to copy Blacktail Studios' walnut and black epoxy style. So why not fuse my pallet wizardry with a fresh take on the river table? I guess this is where the idea of the pallet blocks river table was born.
Pallet block river table?
Yes?
That has got to be the worst idea I have ever heard of.
I think I may have caught James on the wrong day here, but of course I started doubting my own idea. To add to the predicament, I've pitched the project to sponsors as a walnut and black epoxy table. That's quite a departure from pallet blocks, wouldn't you say? I'm also getting the few walnut pieces I was able to source out in the open too. And just as I was mulling over my material choices, my deep pour epoxy from Epodex arrived. Well, there are a few puzzle pieces I'll have to maneuver into place, and that needs to happen pronto. And so, the adventure begins. The very first step of this adventure is getting the nails out of the pallet blocks. I could try and leave them inside, but that would just leave me very worried every time I need to cut it, route it, or flatten it. So unfortunately, there is no way around dismantling the blocks, pulling the nails out, and gluing them back together. I wonder if there's a market for nail-free pallets. Then I need to figure out how to use the walnut chunks in the table. I could combine walnut and pallet blocks and somehow make a pallet blocks river table. Perhaps where the blocks are the river. I haven't seen anybody make a pallet blocks river table, and I'm pretty sure it will disturb a lot of people. So I started the long and tiring process of making the walnut slabs fit into the form. That required sawing off one side, measuring and calculating. Did I say I hate doing math? After all this cutting, measuring, and especially my lack of math, you might be wondering how I got to this point in my woodworking journey. Well, I'm a self-taught woodworker, videographer, and entrepreneur. And a big part of my self-guided education has come from Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of classes on a myriad of topics. I have taken some amazing video editing classes.
I'm going to show you some editing techniques that will optimize your editing.
That have not only helped improve the quality of my videos, but also streamlined my editing process.
That it's as fast as possible.
Being self-employed, it is crucial to continue learning and growing, and Skillshare offers the resources and the community to help me do just that. Whether you are interested in starting your own YouTube channel, improving your woodworking skills, or even learning design or managing your own business, I highly recommend checking out Skillshare. Skillshare is giving the first 1,000 of my subscribers who click the link in the description a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. Another job is getting bark and the cambium layer off with a wire brush. There were also some knots and some soft spots that I've removed with a chisel. If I leave these, they will cause issues when the table gets older, so it is best to remove them and fill the voids with epoxy. I did spend a lot of time fiddling the rest of the wood into the form, cutting blocks to size, thinking about layout, rearranging, but at some point I figured this is the design I'm going with. I have made the perfect pallet river table, the perfect clone between a traditional river table and my pallet blocks coffee table. What could possibly go wrong? You know, wood floats in liquids, so it is necessary to keep the wood down when pouring epoxy. Somebody suggested in the comments of one of my last videos that I could just pour a thin layer of epoxy at the bottom and let it cure, and it would hold down the wood. Brilliant. So I tried that, but I must have been a little too impatient because after... I'm getting ahead of myself. I also got a notification on YouTube. Somebody I don't know tagged me in their video. Better check it out. After a few days I figured the wood was pretty much stuck in the form, so I started mixing up epoxy. I mixed 4 cans of deep pour epoxy from Epoxy. This is the version that can cure in one layer up to 10 centimeters in thickness. I have been using Epoxy for my previous projects with great success, and I'm excited to see how it performs in this application. So I mixed epoxy and poured and mixed and poured epoxy. And I finally got a moment to see who tagged me in their video.
Speaking of hilarious, creative, and an excellent woodworker, Jesper.
It was about the time I realized that this guy was talking about me that I also realized that a few of my wood blocks were just floating around.
Just, my goodness.
It's not just a few blocks.
Jesper Makes, please.
They are all breaking loose.
This guy, the stuff...
I didn't wait long enough.
I just encourage you to check out some of his videos.
No. All the wood is floating.
And he does stuff, and I think, I couldn't even begin right now to try to do that. But I'm having a great time watching him do it.
At this point, I was so desperate I gave up filming. But I still had the GoPro on time-lapse over my workbench. The man who said all those nice things about me is Tim Stark. He also makes woodworking videos just like me. And suddenly I realized that it is not just my sponsors who will see this project and hate it. Tim will see it too. And I would hate to disappoint someone as nice as Tim Stark. So I'm really starting to fear the ending of this video. And I'm also developing a solid fear of publishing. I'm trying to get my mind away from the disaster of a project that is curing in my workshop. The piglet in me is still worried about this being a total giant failure. But in a way, this whole journey, even with its ups and downs, is what makes me what I am. And if I'm just listening to the little piglet voice inside me that says, I'll try again tomorrow, maybe it will all be okay somehow. So I'm trusting that little bit of courage I can muster and start taking the old desk apart. I'm also having a good look at the wooden floors made from pine planks. They are really in a bad condition in many spots, so this little piglet grabbed the sander and got to work. I know I could get a bigger tool to sand the floor with, but this is what I have, and since I'm working indoors, it's really important not to make too much dust. At least that's what my wife told me. My mind also started wondering what I could create with the wood from the dismantled desk. I can't quite recall its species. It has been quite some time since I bought these tabletops, but the folks at FlexiSpot were generous enough to send over 2 different styles of height adjustable legs. I'm slowly getting into more of a jigger mood, and I have a hunch that I could craft something extraordinary for that second pair of legs. The pallet block tabletop,
Worst idea ever.
is still drying, and I test Rubia Monocoat oils on my freshly sanded floor. The pine's natural yellow is kinda beautiful, but a bit too bright yellow for me. After trying 10 different shades, and when I say I mean my wife picked natural. It is subtle grey-brown with the knots and dark areas deepening beautifully. So while we wait for the natural oil to show up, there is a little time to look at the FlexiSpot legs. These are their best-selling legs, and the box is really heavy and needs 2 people to move it around. That is, unless you are a 2 meter tall, 100 kilo heavy Viking, of course. But once the box is open, the assembly process is quite straightforward. I do spend a lot of time at the desk editing video, and I'm really looking forward to being able to shift between sitting and standing. The instructions are easy to follow, and all the necessary hardware is included. Once the base is assembled, I attach the control box and connect the wires from the legs to the control unit. This is where you're supposed to attach the legs to the tabletop while laying upside down. But as you know, my tabletops are not quite ready yet. But I can test if the up and down thingy works. Wow, that's really high and really low. Rivers know this. There is no hurry. We shall get there someday. But sadly, my sponsors haven't quite embraced this poo philosophy. After I have been crushing all previous deadlines, I just agreed to have the video ready within 10 days. With that deadline in mind, I think I better get into the workshop. So I was liberating my improvised hold-down clamps that were epoxied down to the table, and it was a pretty rough process to say the least. But with the table finally free, I mixed up some more epoxy to fill up the remaining centimeters of the table and the knot holes. The only problem with that is that it will need to cure for another 5 days. So I can't help but worry that this 10-day deadline might get me into trouble. This model with 4 legs will be the future base under my Pallet river table, but I'm still waiting for it to cure, so I'll need to continue renovating the floor while I'm waiting. Luckily, I'm able to sand the test colors back, and I'm preparing the floor with some wood prep from Rubio Monocoat. It is late night, and I'm hoping to be able to put on the Oil Plus 2 Seep Natural tomorrow. The next morning the sun is shining, and it is another chance to show off how stupid I am. The oil and the B component comes in 2 different cans, naturally. And apparently it is difficult for this DIYer to get the cans separated. The mixing cup makes it a no-brainer to get the mixing ratio right, so what could possibly go wrong? I'll see myself out. Floor is curing, and the pallet blocks river table has also cured, so it is finally time to flatten it. I'm using a thing called a slab matrix. It's basically an XY slider that allows my router to slide around at the same level over a large surface. I'm using a huge flattening bit, and I also remember to put new filters on my face mask. This type filters out even the smallest particles. Flattening with a router is really dirty work, but it is also here the look of the table will be revealed finally. After flattening, sanding and hiding mistakes with a black marker, I'm in a hurry, you know, it is time for the most satisfying part of the whole project, putting the finish on the table. For the finish, I'm using Rubio Monocoat's Oil Plus 2C in the pure color. This product is essentially the same one as I used on the floor, but the pure variant is transparent and only highlights the wood's natural colors without altering the tone. It's a 2-component finish that helps the oil cure faster. I always begin with finishing the underside of the table. Once that's done, I turn it over to apply the finish to the top. Using a piece of wood or whatever I got laying around, I distribute the oil across the entire surface, making sure to cover every centimeter. Shortly after applying the oil, I take a cloth and begin to wipe off the excess. As the first cloth becomes saturated and has been used on the entire table, I switch to a fresh one, wiping the surface one more time. This extra step helps ensure a perfectly smooth finish. The curing process is really fast, taking just 24 to 48 hours to completely harden. That's incredibly convenient for me, as I'm only a few days and hours away from my deadline. I did put a little video of the finishing process out on Instagram, and I got a message from a guy who calls himself Bourbon Moth or something like that.
Is that a river table?
But I'm honestly in such a hurry to meet my deadline, I'll have to watch his message later. Oh, I totally forgot. I have 2 table bases and I still have the second tabletop to go. My plan is to make some kind of workbench out of the old tabletop, an indoor workbench for my office, height adjustable. I have this idea that there should be both horizontal and vertical work surfaces, and it should be full of dog holes, so I can make or buy all kinds of hold down tools and other stuff that fits into dog holes. I use the Festool domino to join all the pieces together, and the only thing holding this together is dominoes and wood glue. I sand it down to 150 grit, remove all the dust with raw wood cleaner, and give it a good massage with Rubio Monocoat Oil Plus 2C Pure. While the workbench dries, we carry the tabletop inside, and I think about the message I got from the bourbon guy. I'm sure he's an Epoxy and river table fan who just wants to congratulate me on my Pallet river table. And suddenly I'm not so scared of what the sponsors will say. After this journey filled with Tigger optimism, Piglet anxiety, I'd appeared with some AR depression, and some would say some of Robin's delusional thinking. I just realized that I didn't build this alone. I had chats and encouragements from friends and family, and I had people lifting me up when I was down. I had Mark Dana, James Finger, and many other woodworking friends like Tim Stark cheering me up along the way. I also had some awesome sponsors, and I would like to thank FlexiSpot for their awesome table bases. And I can honestly say they work above my expectation. Also Epodex for the epoxy and Rubio Monocoat for the wood finish. And a big thank you to Skillshare for being an awesome sponsor of the video. And to everybody for accepting that I kept delaying the premiere of the video. I have links for friends and sponsors in the description. Please go and check them out. Oh yeah, and the message from the bourbon guy? I may have gotten a new friend.
What the heck is that? Is that a river table? Ugh! What is with these flippin' pallets too? Oh my gosh. I don't know who this Jesper Makes guy is, but Jesper makes some ugly flippin' stuff. Ugh. Ugh.
I'm going to rip off a classic piece of furniture that normally sells for up to $2,500 US. I'm going to recreate it using recycled wood from my own pallet backyard. And as the hustler I am, I'm going to try and sell it for as much money as possible. This video is also sponsored by Squarespace, because every hustler needs a sleek website to showcase their authentic creations. It was maker Andrew Cito in Canada who brought my attention to the classic Herman Miller bench. Originally designed in 1946 by George Nelson. It's still very popular all over the world, and it's still selling for quite a lot of money. Wow, that is a lot of money for a bench. So if I want to make a profit on this build, it is really important that I keep the cost down. It seems like a very easy build, famous last words, with 12 boards and 3 to 4 stringers, and some weirdly angled legs. It seems like just the perfect project for this little woodshop, or a disaster waiting to happen. I have these weird pallets, where the main benefit is that the boards are pretty long. It's just a regular pine pallet. I haven't tried to dismantle this type of pallet before. My first attempt trying to hammer these massive stringers off like I do with Europals, but they didn't move. So I went another route and put the pallet on the floor upside down and started to punch each board off individually. That worked pretty okay. The boards were a little rotten at the ends, and many nails just went through the boards. In retrospect, it would have been easier to cut the ends off with a circular saw and just punch the board off the middle stringer. Hindsight is 2020, right? I'm going to use the stringers from this pallet to make the legs of the bench later, so I better denail them. I'm also denailing the boards with this AP700 denailer. It basically just punches the nail out and into my garbage can, which I happen to have placed just underneath my workbench. What a coincidence. It's like a carnival game, but the price is a bench. I'm sawing the ends of the boards, and that leaves me with boards that are all longer than 145 centimeters. That's about 57 inches. In the drawing that I downloaded from the Herman Miller website, it looks like there are 12 boards or slats, and they are about twice as high as they are thick. My boards here are about 10 centimeters wide and 2.5 centimeters in thickness, so I'll just be ripping them down in the middle. That little operation just gave me twice as many boards to work with. It's like magic, or just math. I adjusted the fence on the table saw a little and cut off the opposite side of the board, bringing it down to about 4.5 centimeters in height, I guess. It's like giving the boards a little haircut, just a little trim, because they are going to be standing up like this in the final product. The width of the boards is about 2.5 centimeters, and I have calculated the width of the boards on the original bench to be about 2 centimeters. So I bring out my old and trusted, mostly old, thickness planer and take a few millimeters off each side. A few extra passes and the boards are down to the magic 2 centimeters. There's a reason I need them to be that exact, and we'll see that soon. I cut all the boards down to exactly 145 centimeters. I do that by very precisely adjusting my homemade stop block system on my miter saw. All the boards and the stretches in the bench are joined together by half-lap joints. It's not a very difficult joint, but there are so many of them on this very simple bench. My buddy Andrew Zito made the cuts on his table saw using a regular saw blade. That required a lot of cuts for each joint. You'll need to be a really experienced table saw user to do that. You know, like a woodworking wizard. He also suggested using a Dado in the table saw to make more precise cuts. I'm not a table saw wizard like Andrew, and Dado stacks for table saws are forbidden in Europe. Something with safety, the time it takes a Dado blade to stop rotating. It's like us in the European Union has never heard of living life on the edge of a saw blade. But then I saw that I actually could get a Dado stack at my European hardware store. And this is apparently the first Dado blade that's approved by the EU. I haven't seen any other European woodworkers use this yet, so this could be the very first European Dado YouTube video. Legally, of course. I'm basically a woodworking pioneer. To be honest, I was a little nervous mounting and starting up the Dado blade for the first time. It is made up of 2 outer blades and up to 3 inner blades to be able to adjust the width of the cut. I had no idea if it was possible to assemble it the wrong way, so hitting the on button for the first time was kinda nerve-wracking. Next issue to overcome was the throat plate. The one I have only fits a normal blade, and because this Dado is a new thing in Europe, no shops had the Dado throat plate in stock. And while I tried to figure out how to assemble a Dado blade, I also heard Stumpy Nubs say,
"Do not attempt to cut a Dado with the throat plate removed. Put in a homemade insert if you must, but keep it covered."
So I guess I'll be making a throat plate. I mean, how hard can that be? Famous last words. I found a piece of scrap plywood that was about the same thickness as my existing throat plate. I mounted the plate on the plywood with some double-sided tape, and then I found a floss trim bit in my bits drawer. It should be pretty simple to just route out a piece of ply in the exact same dimension as the existing plate. Okay, so my double-sided tape is not that sticky. I'll just try again and add some hot glue to it also. So that time I forgot all about double-sided tape and only used hot glue. And that worked. I replicated the various holes on my drill press. And now we just need the slot for the Dado blade itself. And it is created like this. It's like we are breaking new ground here, or at least new plywood. And by new plywood I mean really scrappy scrap plywood. So now it is finally time to explore the unexplored and cut some Dados on European ground. Let's take a moment and explore this moment in history in all its glory and greatness. And add another one to the list. If you have seen some of my previous videos, you know I do anything I can to avoid math. And here's why. I planned to put 4 stringers in this bench, so I took the length of the bench and divided it by 4. But that gave me 5 stringers, not 4. Not a big problem. I'm sure 5 stringers will look great. It's only a thorn in my pride, and nobody will notice if I don't say anything. Which is kinda too late now. Moving on, I'm giving the boards and stretchers a good sand with 80 grit sandpaper before I glue the bench top. The fitting is really tight, but the bench top is coming together. It's like a puzzle, but the pieces are heavy and made of wood. And just like a puzzle, if you can't make the pieces fit, you can always sand them down until they do. So while this pallet wood puzzle dries, I'm directing my focus to making the legs. 2 of the heavy stretches from the pallet are completely denailed, so I bring them over to the bandsaw and cut them in half. I don't know the exact measurements of the original legs, so I'm cutting them down in size. I must have been having a bad bandsaw day, because they are not that flat. It's like the bandsaw and I were on different wavelengths. I should be running them over a jointer, but my shop is weirdly enough still missing one of those. So I'm using my own little invention, clamping all the boards together and sending them through the lunchbox thicknesser. And voila, flat as a rock. Or maybe even flatter, if you have seen some of those weirdly bumpy rocks laying around. The legs on this bench consist of 2 squares, except they are not square. After some intense online research, I figured out that the shape is called, I don't know how to say that, isosceles trapezoid, which sounds like something straight out of a geometry nightmare. And I didn't even figure out the angle they are cut with. Andrew did. So I just copied what he did and tilted my table saw blade 8 degrees and cut all the pieces at this angle. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and also the easiest way to avoid doing math. So for the assembly of the legs, there are plenty of options. You can drive screws in from the top and the bottom. They would be invisible when the bench is standing on the floor, which it hopefully would be doing most of the time. I decided to bring out the Festool domino and make a strong joint using some giant 10 cm dominoes and some wood glue. I do get some different comments when people see the domino. Yes, it is an expensive tool. And yes, there are many cheaper ways to solve the same joining issue. I'm a big fan of the biscuit joiner, for example, but I hate using dowels. But I like the Viking way of just hammering pegs into holes, and with this tool I can be a little Vikingish and put a giant hidden peg between 2 pieces of wood. I wonder if I can make a horned helmet with this domino. It is the only joining tool that actually makes the joint a lot stronger, and it is a time saver, because time is money and I'm already saving a fortune by making this bench out of pallet wood. While the legs, I mean of course the trapezoids, are drying in clamps, I'm getting fancy and pull out my Japanese pull saw to cut the ends flush. I'm going full samurai mode on this bench. Unfortunately, I'm also caught on my time-lapse camera using a western push saw for most of the cuts. So much for fine woodworking. I guess I'm a wood ninja in training. I sanded and painted the legs black. I don't like watching paint dry, so I started the finishing process of the bench top. I want to give this cheap-looking pine pallet an exclusive look, something like hazelnut or walnut. I don't know exactly how to achieve that on pine, but I feel like a mad scientist in his lab. My first step is pre-treating it with pre-aging stain called Authentic No. 5 from Rubio Monocoat. It penetrates the wood and highlights the wood texture. Then I sand it a bit back with some 150 grit and mix up my own color with some oil samples from Rubio Monocoat. These colors are ice brown, bourbon and castle brown. Sounds like a drink menu from the Dark Ages. Who names these colors anyway? Ice brown? I've never seen brown ice. Or have I? I have seen yellow snow though. I also add in some neutral oil called Pure, and finally some B component called Accelerator. That basically just makes it cure faster. Most woodworkers use oil plus 2C Pure to finish their tabletops and other wood items, but I like to experiment with the colors too. The basics of applying Rubio Monocoat is to rub it onto the wood with a sponge or a piece of cloth. When all the surface is covered and there are no dry spots, you just wipe off the excess with a dry cloth. It is like giving the wood a luxurious spa treatment. I wonder if this would work on my wife too. Speaking of my wife, I'm a little worried because it won't be long before I'm going to show her the bench. And she's going to decide if the bench is worth the money I'm asking for, or exactly how much I should ask for a handmade piece of furniture with quite some story to it. With a design born almost 100 years ago and recrafted with reclaimed wood, is this piece worth 10, 100, 500 or maybe $1,000 US? Let me know what you think. I'm not too hopeful of my wife's verdict because she has not been the biggest fan of my other creations, to say the least.
Nej, hvad har du lavet? Nej, hvor er den flot, skat. Nej, det er en god kaffebænk. Ej, nu spiller jeg kaffe på gulvet. Jeg blev helt overrasket. Nej, hvor er den pæn. Ej, hvor er den flot. Ej.
So my wife's verdict is, she wants to keep it. And she also has a surprise for me. I wonder what it could be. But before we go into that, if you are interested in owning a piece of reclaimed wood history, you'll be happy to know that I'll be custom making these benches on my website going forward. And you can also see the prices we have decided on. And now to my wife's surprise. I was hoping for something else, but she liked the pallet wood bench so much that she wanted me to rebuild our old IKEA kitchen from pallet wood. Sounds like a lot of work. I'm Jesper and I'm taking on a challenge. I want to make a beautiful table using only free recycled materials. I'm inspired by Molly Kurt and his success in making tables from pallet wood, and I want to see if I can beat him at his own game. I'll be sharing my process, the tools and the materials I'm using, and also all the mistakes I'm making along the way. This video is also sponsored by Squarespace, and I hope to sell this table on my new website. So buckle up and let's see if we can pull this off. So, Morley found his pallets on Facebook Marketplace, but I got a call from the owner of this ice cream shop that is currently closed for the winter. He had a few pallets that he asked me to pick up. He said they would be somewhere at the back. Oh, there they are. This one is from Turkey, and the other one is Russian, I believe. Let's see how easy they are to take apart. So, pallet with blocks, I always hammer the blocks off. The pallet from Turkey was pretty solid. I actually broke some of the stringers and blocks, a lot of them actually. Those Turks are some tough ones. The Russian pallet just disintegrated with absolutely no resistance. After the blocks are gone, the next step is getting the big nails out. The easiest way to do it is shooting the nails out with one of these denailer tools. Before I got this tool, I cut the nails short and hammered them out. With the big nails out of the way, there are only some smaller nails left, and it is pretty easy to separate the top boards from the stretchers. Instead of twisting the boards apart with a crowbar, I'm just pushing the stretcher off with a piece of wood. I realize it looks like I have gained a lot of weight, but I'm just wearing a lot of clothing underneath my shirt here. The temperature in my shop is just around freezing, and it is very expensive to run the electric heater, so I'll just adjust my clothing. So with the boards denailed, I decided to give them a rough planing with my little lunchbox thicknesser. The weather cleared up a little, so I headed outside to do it. After a rough surface planing, I took the boards to the table saw to clean the sides. I was also wondering what the tabletop should look like, and I also watched this guy making cutting boards from really thin strips of wood. So hey, I figured why not make a whole tabletop the same way. Watching this cutting board video turned out to be a real disaster for my project later. So I cut all the pallet boards into 3 cm strips and lined them up against each other. The Russian pallet is really white and the Turkish is a little bit more orange. And I remembered I had these African wood deckings that I got for picking them up. That means for free. So why not unite the whole world? And I cut the decking board into 4 strips and then I started gluing it all together. Because of the low temperature, I took it inside to dry overnight, and the very next morning or something, this oversized cutting board tabletop is very much glued together. I have 2 different sanders from Festool, and the one with the number 5 on it is more aggressive in removing material. So I mount an 80 grit sandpaper on it and get to work. I really love the meditating aspect of sanding, but I mostly meditate on how to get a big drum sander in my shop to do all the rough sanding work. If you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments. There's this trend going around among makers where they sharpen pencils with band saws, axes, blades, table saws, even pencil sharpeners. I tried sharpening with my sander, but I really can't recommend it. This is probably where I should have stopped the project and just added some more sanding and some finish, put legs on and tried to sell the thing. But that was not what this dumbass was up to. You see, he had seen this cutting board video where... Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. It will all be very clear in a moment. So last night I rewatched the woven cutting board from Fisher's shop and I thought I would just put in some woven dark wood into my tabletop cutting board. All you need to do is just cut up your project and glue it back together. So I cut some thin strips of the dark decking board. I had a voice in the back of my head saying don't do this, but my frontal lobe and my hands totally ignored all incoming warning signals and found the jigsaw. I realized that putting a few thin strips into the tabletop would just look ridiculous. I was just beating myself up inside and thinking I should cut it all into firewood so I at least could keep warm.
When you try your best but you don't succeed.
But then I came up with a whole new strategy for covering up gigantic woodworking mistakes. And that is to keep going and pretend it is not a mistake. So this is between you and me now. So with the table cut in half, it was way easier to bring it over to the bandsaw, because that is what you do with tables. The line I cut in the middle, let's call it the path. And now I just need to cut a lot of other paths in this table and essentially make a giant puzzle, because that was what I had planned all the time, sort of. Now I'm just testing my puzzle solving skills. For the next step, which I planned all the time, I'm gonna need to build a little something. I have this old water damaged chipboard and a battery powered circular saw that just cut... Oh, you need to charge those. With the water damage cut off, I divide the rest into a bottom and 4 sides. I do that on the table saw, now that I have one. Before this I used a track saw. Before that I used a handsaw. Before that I just used Jedi mind tricks. This thing wobbles in all directions, but hopefully it will straighten up when I assemble it. I cover it with some tape and put a silicone caulk where all the boards come together. Come together, right? I'll just see myself out. I let the caulk dry overnight and I came back the next morning to put on this release agent that I luckily had laying around. I still had the stop block on my miter saw from cutting the short sides of the mold, so I cut some pallet wood at the exact same length and added to this confusing mix. I mean totally planned mix of things, because apparently wood floats in most liquids. I just checked to see if I have time to do an epoxy pour, and it seems there is time. I have seen a lot of videos with people pouring epoxy, and the problem is always cooling the shop down so the epoxy doesn't overheat while curing. So I don't give the temperature in my shop much thought, at least not until a few days later, where the epoxy is still wobbly and jelly. I got in touch with Epoxy, and apparently the temperature shall be over 10 degrees and it is best around 15 degrees Celsius. That's not Fahrenheit, in case you were wondering. I live in a civilized country where 0 means freezing and 100 means coffee is ready. Easy to remember. So without starting any camera, I rushed the table to its new drying place under my desk in my office. After a few days of smelling my feet, the epoxy is cured. I need to refill the rivers in this weird river table, I guess, so I mixed up a little more epoxy. After a few days I checked in on the project, only to realize that my floor isn't level. The new epoxy had gathered at one half of the table. I turned it around and repeated the process. While it was curing, I received some packages. The good folks at Sorter's shop had seen my homemade flattening deck, they probably had a good laugh, and they reached out and suggested I could try out the new slab matrix and see if I liked it better. We'll get to that. My little river table, or maybe I should call it the small streams labyrinth table, had finally cured, and the weather had shifted from freezing to foggy. It's finally time to unpack and flatten this table. And in terms of competing with Molly Kurt, I think I'm behind on points. I have spent way more time than planned, and the wood may be free, but then I added 5 liters of epoxy resin to the equation. And that stuff is not cheap. Also epoxied my hold-down pallet clamps down to the table itself, so they are kind of difficult to remove. After some hammer action, I bring out my electric plane and take them down to the epoxy surface. Last night I was trying to figure out how to hold the table down to the worktop while flattening it. It's kind of thin, so I had to be creative. My solution was to bring out my biscuit joiner and cut some slices in the sides of the table. Then I use washers and screws to clamp it down to the work surface. It is time to try out my new flattener here, the Slab Matrix. I just realized this tabletop is so thin it would be really difficult to flatten it with my homemade jig, which is not that precise. The first round of flattening took off the excess epoxy at each end, and I'm lowering the bit a few millimeters and giving it another round. On the third tour, I'm down to the bare wood all over the tabletop. I should mention that I need to mount dust extraction on this slab matrix, and the company making it strongly recommends doing so. I'm turning it around and giving the bottom a flattening too. And I'm actually pretty impressed with the precise flattening I'm able to do here. I have a big table coming up and I'm really happy I have this jig now. I'm cutting the table to size on my table saw. I mean, a table saw must be for cutting tables, right? I sanded out the router marks with this Festool No. 5 sander and some 8 grit sandpaper. There are some chip outs in the epoxy that I fixed with some CA glue and some chip outs in the wood that I fixed with wood filler quick. I'm really behind on points when comparing to Morley Kurt's build because I used epoxy. On the other hand, Morley spent money on the legs for his table, so I figured I could use some free legs and save some money. A while back I found this old Singer sawing table at our local recycling station, and I think the metal base could work as the base for the table. I'll just take it apart and restore the base. I'm also really running out of time here, because the video needs to be uploaded at a certain time. After sanding the CA glue and the wood filler down with 180 grit, it is time to start the finishing process. First step is making sure the wood is totally clean from wood dust, and one of the best options I have come across is raw wood cleaner. Then I'm mixing up some rubium monocoat oil plus 2C pure. This wood finish comes in a lot of colors and also a clear one, which is called pure. The oil can be used as it is, but if you mix it up with the accelerator, it cures in just a few hours and can be used after 48 hours. And it only needs one application. This really fits my desperate need of getting this table finished soon. But will I be able to sell the table and make a profit before the video goes live? I hope so. Instead of calling this a river or small streams table, I think I will call it the Pathfinder table. Society wants us to take the straight highway and be a really efficient citizen. But the best life is often found when we take the lesser traveled roads and find our own path. And there are so many if we just dare to look for them. I hereby call you the Pathfinder table. The table has been finished for a day and put for sale online. But I didn't sell it to anyone yet. I'm also thinking maybe it was a dumb idea to try and compete with Morley Kurt on this, as he's obviously very good at promoting and selling his projects on social media. So I have decided to give the table away to one of my biggest supporters, my mother-in-law. So I took the finished table to her, and it was immediately taken into use as her new sewing and work desk. I really couldn't be happier, because she has supported my woodworking ambitions more than I can describe with words. So with this one closed off, I'm heading home to start on a new project. But then I remembered that I didn't close the online advertising of the table just yet, so I'm literally advertising something that I don't have anymore. There's a word for that kind of thing that I wouldn't like to be accused of, so I'd better take it down immediately. I'm Jesper. I'm a Danish woodworker, but I haven't been woodworking for very long. I started out building from scrapwood. That's wood like this, pallet wood, old furniture, firewood, Almost 2 years ago, I signed up for a Scrapwood competition, where I made this coffee table from pallet blocks. It never made it into the competition because I got delayed by 3 months. But I don't regret making it because it really kickstarted my woodworking. But guess what? The same Scrapwood competition is back. And you know what? I'm going to make a new Scrapwood project. And not just make the deadline, but also win the competition and collect the first prize. That's my plan anyway. So what should I build for the Scrapwood competition? I just got this mystery box and I have a feeling what it could be, because Kamikoto reached out to me and asked if I wanted to feature their knives in an upcoming video. And it looks like they're here already. By first sight they look pretty awesome, but let's test them a little later. So I watched this guy from Ukraine make a cutting board with long grain and these end grain cookie inserts. And I think it looks awesome. I have all kinds of offcuts and I wonder if I can build a cutting board as amazing as this, or perhaps even more amazing. First off, I'll need to create a form to epoxy resin all the pieces together, and I'll use this piece of old chipboard. When I have cut all the pieces, I cover them with some tape. I hope to create a form that I can reuse for future builds. So with a form that is covered with tape and sprayed with mold release, this should be possible. Technically. Maybe. I don't know. I guess I'll find out later. Moving on, I'm starting to design the cutting board. My form is about 5.5 centimeters in height, and I'll be cutting all the wood that goes into the board to this height. I'm using my bandsaw and this homemade bandsaw crosscut jig to cut the wood. After cutting all the scraps to length, it's just a matter of putting all the wood into the form. I decided to cut the old furniture wood and the pallet wood into smaller pieces to create a more random and chaotic pattern. I have never seen a scrapwood project using so many different kinds of scraps. It literally checks all the boxes, and I think I have a really good chance of winning the competition. But to make sure I win, I'll throw in a few more pieces of scraps later. And I think I just had an idea that will absolutely lock in the victory. More about that later. I'm going to use epoxy resin to glue it all together. I'm mixing up 3 liters of resin, and yes, that's 2-to-1 of resin and hardener. Not just the hardener and hardener.
Because that can cause some problems, as you very well know.
The amount was just a wild guess on my part. In a moment, we'll see if I mixed way too much, or if the form will leak and I'll have to start all over again. So the amount of resin mixed seems to be perfect, but I totally forgot that wood floats, and especially all these small pieces. I thought that if I squeezed some more wood together, it would be easier to keep them down. So I found some pieces of walnut I cramped down there. And then I just found all things heavy and stacked on top of the cutting board. I mean, all things down to the last hammer and box with screws. While doing this, I'm also wondering if my mold will leak or if I can get it disassembled again. But that's a worry to be figured out soon enough. After all this hard work, I needed a little snack break. So I went to my outdoor kitchen and prepared some fruit. I usually use angle grinders and axes to prepare food, but since I now have these Kamikoto knives, I thought I might give them a try. They are made from Japanese steel and have a single bevel edge, which makes them unbelievably sharp. And I really enjoyed my little food break here. I can't wait to try them on my new cutting board. While I had a break, somebody messed around in my shop with some whiskey barrels. I have really no idea what's going on, so I'll just get rid of these and see how my cutting board has been doing during my break. Well, no leaks. What? No leaks? After a bit of unboxing action, I'm also very curious to see if the mold release works. And like magic, the mold released from the board. Australian woodworker Mark Dana told me to build projects to fit into my woodworking machines. I must have forgotten because I need to flatten this board, but my flatnesser is only 20 centimeters wide and the board is 40. I'll need to flatten it some other way, and the best way I know is using my router with a flattening bit. I find a flat pallet, secure the board in the middle, and then I use some of my pipe clamps to act as rails on each side. Make sure they are perfectly level, or else your piece will end up not being flat, which is kind of the purpose with this little arrangement. Then I have two long metal things from some sliding barn doors. I had a light bulb moment a year back, some would say that was the only one, where I figured out that my router came with these metal things that fitted magically in the sliding barn door slots. This allows the router to ride very close to the surface of the subject in need of flattening. I flatten both sides this way, while I'm dreaming of getting a really big thicknesser, or at least a friend who has one. My track saw is total crap, so I'm trying to cut this board down to size with my bandsaw. It should be possible, because the mold I made was perfectly square. So, at least in theory, the board is also perfectly square, meaning I should be able to just run it up against the fence and get the opposite side perfectly aligned. Worked fine with the two long sides, but it turns out my bandsaw table doesn't have unlimited width, so I'll have to get a little creative cutting the two short sides. As usual, I got a few last minute ideas that almost ruined the entire project. So how would you rate the following four? I have never cut a juice screw before, and woodworkers talk about it as being one of the things they really dread doing. I found this bit in an old cheap set of router bits. Looks like it could make a decent groove. I'm just quickly setting up my own little juice groove jig. Groove jig, groove jig. So let's see how I did. Fine. Good so far. Oh god! I should have used a sharp quality bit, and I should have moved it in the direction that would push the router into the fence and not away from it. Here is my take on how to route out the handles on the cutting board. I think that went pretty decent. The ash logs are looking pretty light, and yeah, you guessed it, I fired up my torch and gave them some burn. I stopped when the epoxy started cracking on me. I really should have learned this by now. While sanding the cutting board in all ways possible, I got a crazy idea that will ensure my victory at the Scrapwood competition. By stalking the host of the competition, Tim Greenwood, I learned that he's a big fan of the wood finish from Ruby Monaco. I also learned that the other judge is working for Ruby Monaco. Thirdly, I researched that Rubio monocoat is actually food safe, meaning it's safe to use on wood that is in contact with food. In other words, I can put Rubio on the cutting board. I'm sure the judges will give extra points for this little twist. So while I'm applying Rubio monocoat in the most professional fashion I can come up with, I'm also putting up a poll here on YouTube, asking all you subscribers if you think I'm going to win. Results in a moment. I'm really excited to see that all you guys voted that I would definitely win the Scrapwood competition. So while we wait for the result to come in, I'm going to test out the new cutting board and prepare some home-cooked dinner. So I hooked up with one of the chefs of this house, and after collecting some items from around the garden, we headed over to the little greenhouse to do some chopping. Things have really started to move. After I posted the cutting board on my community feed and you guys said I'm definitely going to win, the judge Tim asked if he could give me a call. I think that's a really good sign, because the winners always get notified ahead of the official announcement. He probably chatted with the Rubio guy and they agreed there's only one possible winner. Oh, there he is.
Hey up, Jesper. Yeah, the cutting board's looking really good, but the prizes are for UK only, so as much as you probably need a Rubio one-on-one training day, you can't win, mate. Hello? Jesper?
Hi, I'm Jesper. In this video I'm making a project for a client who wants a new table for their kitchen. They want something new, inspired by the sea, the sun and something a little Viking-ish. The client had watched my videos and said, just do as you like. If you say that to me, I'll give you something new, something Viking-ish. I'm thinking of using wood and epoxy.
Well, hey Jesper, Vikings didn't have epoxy, did they?
No, but I'll have to come back to that one later. When my customer said, just do as you like, I thought they also meant take as long as you like, but that was not the case, as I got a text shortly after saying they invited guests for a party in 3 weeks, and they would like the table by then. That's why I decided to skip some steps in making the mold and just put a tarpaulin down in my chipboard frame. That should work just fine. Then I'm just going crazy with some wood. This is ash wood, something I literally have dry in my backyard. Oak would have been the Viking choice, but ash is great. Perhaps the new age Viking choice. Let me know what you think. While I'm designing the tabletop, I'm thinking I can save some time and buy a table base online. And I think this one will be perfect for the future tabletop. At this point, I'm not sure what the tabletop is going to look like, but hey, they said just do as you like, so I'll just follow my inspiration and see where the wind, the sea and the wood is taking me. For the creative part, this is the best I could come up with. A cookie in the middle to represent the sun, and for practical reasons some pieces of wood for a frame all around. Perhaps some rafters to represent sunbeams. Ooh, I like the symmetrical look of this. Perhaps I should just fill the spaces up with some wood offcuts from my cookie coffee table. But after a little playing around, I decided to make a more simple pattern.
G'day, Jesper. Mate, there are rumours going around that you're not using pallet wood anymore. I thought you were the Danish pallet Viking.
True, I have been using a lot of pallet wood. The next part of the build is the epoxy part, and my epoxy here is from Epoxy. With this type it should be possible to cast up to 5 cm thick layers in one pour. But I'll just begin with dropping 2 buckets of resin into my form here and see if it holds up. One of these measuring cups holds 5 liters of resin, and I honestly have no idea how many buckets I'll have to drop in here to fill it up. Make a quick guess and remember it a little later. I have often talked to people making epoxy resin projects, and they ask why the epoxy is not curing after even a week, and it's probably due to bad mixing. My tips for this a little bit later. After dropping 2 buckets and waiting 2 days, the epoxy is pretty hard, and I decide to mix and drop 2 more buckets into the table. I waited a few days and mixed 2 more buckets of resin, and now the running total is 30 liters of epoxy resin into this tabletop. The best tip on mixing epoxy is mixing it a lot longer than you think, and then pour it over into another container and mix it again before you pour it into your project. Most epoxy mistakes come from it not being mixed properly, mixed in the wrong ratio, or the wrong epoxy type for the project. While it cures, I'm checking in on the table base I ordered online. It's not sent yet, so I'm getting a little worried. After a week of curing, it's time to disassemble my mold. I had some epoxy leaking on one side of the mold, and I stopped it with silicone caulk and tape. What in reality happened is that I have epoxied the chipboard mold down to my work surface. So when I knock it off, the top layer of the form ply decided to leave with the mold. So I'm getting really worried if I can get the tabletop separated from my workbench. But luckily the tarpaulin is non-stick, so I had no issues getting the tabletop separated from my workbench, and the tarpaulin just slided off the bottom of the tabletop. My biggest issue right now is the tabletop is really heavy and impossible to lift one person. So I decided to start the flattening with my trusted, cheap, no-brand electric planer. I posted some pictures of the build on my Instagram, but I shouldn't have done that.
So it's true, you're not using pallet wood anymore. Do you realise you'll be getting the whole of the pallet wood community on your neck now, mate?
For the next step, I'm driving up to Creative Woodworking in Portland, Oregon, to have them flatten my project on their industrial white belt sander thicknesser. Oh, sorry, for a moment I thought I was Cam from Blacktail Studio. I mean, for the next step, I set up my world-famous flattening jig I made from pipe clamps and a couple of barn door sliding things. While I'm flattening this on both sides the hard way, I will mention makerbook.io, a website created by Cam from Blacktail Studio. The idea here is that you can find woodworking shops where you can rent time or tools to get help on your woodworking projects. And if you have a shop, you can create it on makerbook.io. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a shop with a big thicknesser around here, so I'll just do it the hard and dirty way. This flattening job produced 3 boxes of shavings I'll need to get to the recycling station for proper disposal. The first pour leaked a little and created this edge on 2 sides of the table. Should be pretty easy to get off. I've removed the rest of the epoxy on the sides with a metal polishing disc on my angle grinder. I don't want sharp corners on the table, so I cut off those corners with a circular saw. I'm still waiting for the table base to show up, and now I'm getting really worried. I really like the floating design on the sides of the table, and the epoxy bond to the wood is obviously very strong. but I would like to add a little insurance policy on the bond, so I decided to add some inlays. Bow tie inlays with sharp corners seems to be very popular, but I don't think it matches this table with all the round shapes, so I settled on this round shape of inlay. There's probably some clever way to create this shape with a bandsaw and a router template.
Yes.
But I'm not that clever guy.
No, you're not.
On the other hand, I'm the guy with the shape of origin, and I just cut out the inlays with that. I also need to cut out the shape in the table. My tabletop is almost done, but the table base I ordered is nowhere to be seen. The company apparently didn't ship it yet, and I'm seriously running out of time, so I'll need to consider the alternatives. One alternative is to drive down to my local hardware store and buy some metal hairpin legs. But then I asked the judges, and the other alternative is to simply make the table base from the same type of wood as the tabletop. And I have these logs sitting in my woodstock. The judges seemed quite pleased with that option, so I'll give it a try. First I'll need to cut the logs to rough length, and then I have to find a way to mill it on my bandsaw. I screw it to a straight piece of wood and run it through the bandsaw. And shortly after, I have 4 live edge table legs. Live edge table legs. I like the sound of that. The plan is to make a star base, so first I guess I'll have to make 2 X's. Don't worry, right now I'm as confused as you, but it'll make sense in a little while. After the 2 X legs are glued up and dried overnight, I'll need to cut them to size. And in this case, I'll need them to be exactly 70 centimeters in height. There are probably fancy ways to calculate where to cut, but I do anything I can to avoid math, so I just draw 2 lines on my workbench. The top line is 70 meters from the edge, and the middle line is the center of the legs, 35 centimeters from the top and the bottom. I place the legs on top of my lines and mark where to cut. Easy peasy. Now I need to figure out how to mount one X to the other, and the solution I came up with is this. So, two bad things happened. One is that I covered the tabletop and the base in Rubio Monaco Pure. That's not one of the bad things. But the SD card with the footage of it went bonkers, corrupt, unrecoverable. The other thing is that I got a call from my client with some really bad news. I just had to digest the news a bit, so I took the finished table down to the sea. So the message from my client is they can no longer afford to pay for the table. This is due to the crazy raises in costs of energy in Europe caused by the war in Ukraine. So if you are interested in buying this table, I have now made it for sale. Check the link in the description. While drinking a bit of Viking milk, I got a message.
Sorry to interrupt, mate. I think there is a crowd of angry pallet wood makers heading to your house right now.
No, he's only joking. He'll be back.
Hi, I'm Jesper. It's Friday and I am just about to... Ow! Let's go back to Monday of that week. My boss told me to get my finger out of my rear end and start the renovation of our bedroom. The main thing of that project would be a headboard and some shelves on each side of the bed. I've recently made an end-grain coffee table, so I promptly suggested making a cookie end-grain headboard. But my boss doesn't like too much of what she calls hobbyton. But hey, what about a slab of wood with some clear epoxy and some flowers in the clear epoxy? While I was kindly being made aware of all the mistakes I made with epoxy and how long time it took to complete it, it was suggested I should probably make something a little different. And then my boss took off to teach at a seminar for the rest of the week, and I realized I had until sometime Friday all alone. So what should I build for the bedroom? I'm going to make a pallet wood bedroom. And I'm going to surprise my boss and have it finished when she gets back in 4 days. What could possibly go wrong? Over the years I have dismantled a bunch of these CP9 pallets. And the unique thing about them, these bottom boards are pretty thick. I have been cutting them off with a circular saw like this and just left them in my wood stock waiting for a project. And I think that project is now. So let's get it all out of the gems. So while I was thinking about how to make all of these into a headboard, I remembered that my boss likes herringbone floors and patterns. A herringbone pattern is inspired by the bones from a fish, and we don't have any floors like that, but perhaps I could make a herringbone headboard for her. I start by cutting off one end to get a square reference point. And then I set up a stop block on my miter saw and I cut all the opposite ends, and voila, all the boards are the same length. All the boards also need to be the same width, and normally I would run them through my table saw. But my new table saw is unfortunately not operational yet, so I'm running them through my bandsaw instead.
I still have no regrets about selling the bandsaw.
I have 2 sheets of thin plywood that came from shipping boxes, and I decided to use them as the back of the headboard. I clamped them down to the work surface and started laying out the herringbone pattern. When I was happy with the pattern, I knocked open a bottle of wood glue and started gluing it all together. I let the glue dry overnight, and now there is only 4 days till my boss returns. I'm feeling pretty confident I can make it on time at this point. The headboard is totally stable. I rough trim the edges and I give it a tour with the belt sander until it's relatively flat.
A few dusty moments later. A dusty hour later. Many dusty hours later.
I try to fill some of the holes with some dust from the belt sander and some CA glue, but that is not the best solution. I remember my boss wanted a small table or shelf by the bed, and I'm thinking of a creative way to make one. I have run out of the full-length pallet boards, but wait, I have all these offcuts. While that dries, I'm giving the headboard a little chamfer. When the shelf's dry, I run it through the thicknesser a few times, and I cut it to size with a track saw. I need to attach the shelf to the headboard, and I'm thinking of doing a mortise and tenon joint, sort of. To help me with that, I'm trying out a new tool in my shop. The shaper is a router, but it's also a CNC. I'm drawing a simple shape on the display, and then I'm placing it on my workpiece, the shelf, and then cutting along the outside line of the shape. On the headboard, I now need to cut out the same shape, so I just draw where I want the shelf to attach. And then I place the digital shape on top of my pencil line. And then I cut out all the material inside the shape. If you are one of the people who hates mistakes and bad judgment, perhaps skip ahead a little, because I'm going to try out a few things that I'm going to regret. I want a darker color of the wood, so I'm trying out the pre-aging stain from Rubio Monocoat. It made it go all blue, and I didn't want that, so I sanded it back as good as I could. Hoping to get a darker color, I decided to try out the Rubio oil called Smoked Oak. It made it go all green, and it looked like I had used pressure-treated wood. I didn't want that, so I tried to sand it back. The still wet oil clogged the sandpaper, so I took a very shallow pass with an electric plane. It's now Thursday afternoon, and I convinced myself that I just like the natural color of the wood. I just applied some Rubio Monocoat Pure, but to my horror I saw the light wood was looking very yellow, and the first stain was still visible in some parts. And the oil just highlighted it. I was very devastated. My boss was coming home in less than 24 hours, and the only thing I had was a very ugly block of pallet wood. It was like the universe was trying to send me a message.
When you try your best, but you don't succeed, when you get what you want.
When you try your best, but you don't succeed.
When you try your best, but don't succeed.
And when I didn't listen, The universe just turned up the sound.
When you try your best, but you don't succeed.
Thursday, very late, I gave up. And I decided to burn the damn thing.
When you try your best but you don't succeed. When you feel so tired but you can't sleep. Stuck in reverse.
But when I burned it, I realized that burning was really just a quick way of getting the finish off. And it also gave the wood the brownish color I was looking for. So I sanded the burned wood a bit back, and very, very late Thursday night, I settled on the Rubio Monocoat walnut on top of the sanded and burned wood. And because I was in the very hours of the very last day before my boss returns, I really needed it to work. While it cured, I turned my attention on how to mount it on the wall. Since it's a pallet wood project, I'm going to mount it with pallet wood too. I haven't done any French cleats before, and my table saw is still not up and running. But hey, I can tilt my bandsaw table, and before long I have these two long boards cut at the same angle. I mount one on the wall and the other one on the back of the headboard. I give the headboard a quick touch-up, and while it cures, I figure I may just have time to make a little statement. A little rebellious action. You see, I only made one side with a shelf, and now it's time to make a little table to fit the other side of the bed. My side. A friendly neighbor gave me some cherry logs, and I'm going to make the most Hobbiton-ish bedside table I can come up with. After cutting the log to rough length with a chainsaw, I remove the bark. And then I cut the tabletop end flat with the bandsaw.
I still have no regrets selling the bandsaw. I'm still not regretting.
I use a wire brush on an angle grinder to clean up the surface, and, of course, a lot of sanding. I wonder what kind of legs I should mount on this. I have some metal legs from an old IKEA sofa, but unfortunately only 2 of them are left, and tables are more stable with 3 legs. So I make the 3rd leg out of an ash branch. This is a log furniture technique, where you use a tenon cutter on the branch, and then you drill a corresponding hole in the log, and just hammer the leg in the hole. I poured Rubio Monocoat over the cherry log, but unfortunately the camera wasn't recording that. So I'll guess we'll have to wait and see how it looks until my boss comes home. And that's literally only a few hours away now, so I better mount the whole thing now.
People say I need to get a little action. People say my love life is fiction.
One pallet wood bedroom build later.
I wouldn't give them no matter wrong or right. What I like makes no difference. As they go, get a life. I go. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba go.
I could use a good man to help me get my project on wheels.
Say what to nail.
Hi, I'm Jesper. In this video, I'm making a coffee table from a partly rotten log. I'm trying to sell it on Etsy and make some cash, and I'm trying to convince my mother that I actually can make something in my workshop that people will buy. I'm also making my worst epoxy resin mistake ever, and last year I made a coffee table from pallet blocks, and Joseph commented,
"The ugliest thing I've ever seen made from wood."
I can't wait to see what Joseph and my mother might think of this table, and can I find a buyer on Etsy for it.
So, while Jesper is trying to get started on his project, I'm going to help him with a little explaining. You see, his mom had told him to stop fooling around in his workshop because she believed, like Joseph, he couldn't make anything from wood that someone would pay for. Now, I have seen a little ahead in this video, and I gotta tell you, I'm worried too.
I'm going to try and make something from this log, and in my recent Workbench video, I covered the front with cookies. A cookie is just a slice of the log, and you can cut those with a handsaw or a chainsaw, or as I'm doing here, if you have a sliding bandsaw. Coffee tables made from a cookie seems to be quite popular, but my cookies are not that big. Perhaps if I take 9 of these and make one big cookie out of it. So I've got 9 cookies, but no idea how to join them together. It's a long shot, but I'll try and shoot a message to the makers group.
Jasper, Jimmy DeResta. You're joining cookies. The only good way to join cookies, in my opinion, is to use a biscuit joiner. Get it? Cookies and biscuits?
I do have a biscuit joiner and some biscuits, so I'm going to take the Resta's advice and put biscuits in the cookies. Using biscuits is not so much about strength, it's more about alignment. In the end, it's going to be the glue that is holding it all together. A biscuit joiner is a cheap tool. Most tool brands make them, and it's very easy to use. I don't need to be super precise when cutting, as the biscuit can move a little bit back and forth in the slot. After the glue had been sitting for a few days, I for some reason picked up my electric planer and took a few passes off the end grain. I might have made it a little bit more level, but it also caused some chip out on the edges. So I honestly think I'm entering into the easy part of the table now. Because you know, I'm sort of a pro when it comes to filling up cracks and gaps with a little epoxy. I have some old grey silicone and some packing tape that should easily hold a little epoxy resin inside. I somehow lost the footage of the pour, but I did film it with my phone when I checked in on the project. All the epoxy had escaped my miserable excuse of a barrier.
So here we go again. Yeah, try to cover your mistakes with that electric plane. Oh, now you've got some silicone caulk and tape that's actually meant to be used to hold epoxy inside. Yeah, just use a lot of it. That's going to help. Oh, and that kitchen wrap. Still using that, huh?
Yeah, so now I think I've got these cookies probably wrapped up again. And it's time to start mixing the epoxy again. Yeah, I mean, what could possibly go wrong this time? I mean, I made my mistake, right? Yeah, right. I've even mounted a GoPro on my head, so I can show the whole world how amazing I am at epoxy pours. Did you notice what I did wrong in the beginning? Well, I haven't noticed yet. I still believe this will be the greatest epoxy pour in history. Now that's a guy who just realized how stupid he is. The only thing to do, quickly cover it up before anyone notices. Oh no. No.
Hey, Jesper, I just wanted to give you a little word of advice, alright? Epoxy is dumb. You should just steer clear. Don't even touch it. Maybe when you see epoxy in the store, you buy it, and then throw it away so other people can't use it. I guess if you're gonna use epoxy, you should probably read the labels and make sure you're using both the hardener and the epoxy part, not just the hardener and the hardener, because that can cause some problems, as you very well know.
After this little experience, I really didn't feel like continuing with this damn table. But then I thought about my mother, and that she used to tell me that when you start something, you finish it. So here is my take on how to clean the hardener of 9 cookies. And I really wanted to prove that I could make this table and sell it.
A good way to motivate yourself and feel a little confident is by editing a montage with some cool clips and loud music of yourself doing stuff. So that's exactly what Jesper did.
What you see here is a very simple router jig for flattening large surfaces. I'm using 2 metal guides that's meant to hang sliding barn doors in. I give it a flattening on both sides, and I have gotten this new bit that removes a lot of material fast and is made for flattening. I'll link to it down below. Next job is removing some of the epoxy that is on the outer rim of the cookies. I've removed some of it with a flush trim bit. But then I get the idea to leave some of the epoxy and just try to shape it instead. A metal polishing disc on an angle grinder works fine to shape epoxy. After a short cleanup, I start on the sanding. First I'm taking off the router bit marks with some 40 grit on my belt sander. I do that outside because, no good dust collection on this one. Talking about dust collection, I am so excited about my new sander here. It seems to suck up most of the fine dust, and the best part is when I plug it into the dust extractor here and set it to auto, dust extraction is turned on when I turn on the sander. And you guessed it, it turns off the second after I stop the sander. The best way of fixing the small chip outs in the wood and epoxy is with CA glue. It's really a time saver compared to waiting for epoxy to dry. I added a little round over to the edge of the cookies on both sides, and I sanded it up to 320 grit. This thing is smooth as Tennessee whiskey. Rubio Monaco is actually made for finishing wooden floors, but people also use it on tabletops and other furniture. After my experience with mixing epoxy, I'm a little worried because this is also a 2-component thing that potentially could be f***ed up. I better call someone who knows what they're doing. Someone not as stupid as me. Someone like...
Hey up, Jesper. I thought you might give me a ring, mate.
Hey Tim, why?
Yeah, a lot of people have been talking about you messing up that epoxy mix.
Okay, about messing things up, I need your help. I'm about to...
Finish it with Rubio? Yeah, it's easy, right? Look, there's 2 cans. A, B. It's 3A to 2 of the B. Look. I've painted it on my wall. 3 to 1. Can't go wrong, mate. It'll be great.
So, while Jesper is putting Rubio monocoat on this little project, I'm going to help him with something else he's always forgetting. And that's asking you to subscribe to his YouTube channel. That helps keep the lights on in his workshop. And, you know, it's really difficult to make videos in a dark workshop. So, if you've learned something thus far, or maybe just had a laugh, do that little thing for him.
Why don't you stay or stay, 'cause I could really use a friend.
I'm really excited to open my shop at Etsy and put this table up for sale. Before I know it, my shop is open and my first item is listed. Now it's time to relax and enjoy the table a little before it may be gone to somebody else. The next day I'm checking in on Etsy and it says I'm out of stock. What does that even mean? But then I check my table listing and it's us people from the north. We are very humble and we don't show our emotions. So I'll just tell you, I'm really excited about this. I made something with my hands that somebody else bought for their house. I can't wait to tell my mother about this. Oh, I got a message. I just got an order for a big epoxy table project for a customer, but
Houston, we have a problem.
I don't have a big enough workbench to build it on. I'll need to start on the customer project in 7 days, and with the timber prices these days, I have to build the workbench from reclaimed/free wood. Hi, I'm Jesper, and I'm building a workbench from old horse shed poles, pallet wood, old chipboards, an old dining table, and a log I found in my backyard. I need to finish it in 7 days and keep the cost as close to nothing as possible. It is winter in Denmark, and I am inside preparing for the build. I found this old video about a simple workbench build from DIY for knuckleheads. Let's check it out.
It's gonna be tough, sturdy, cheap.
Since I'm kind of a knucklehead myself, I'll try to follow the basic principles from this build. I haven't got any plans for the build except my own little drawing here. I'll start the build by making the legs.
2 pieces screwed together to form one solid post.
I have a couple of big old poles from a horse shed, and I think they'll be more than solid enough on their own, so I'll just cut them to length on my miter saw. I'll need to connect the legs with a rail, and the video suggests not just bolting it on the side of the legs, but cutting off half of the thickness of the leg for the rail to rest on, in both directions. Ah, that is too complicated.
Now before you say, oh, that's too complicated, it's really simple.
He suggests to make some cuts with a circular saw and then chisel the material out. But my legs are a bit bigger than my circular saw can handle, so I'll start the cross cut on my miter saw. And then I'll reach deep down into the ancient ways of woodworking, and I'll find a handsaw to remove the rest of the material. And before I know it, I have 4 posts ready. Now I'll need some long pieces of wood for the rails, and I have this long horse shed pole. It is way too thick and way too long. After some denailing, I decided to split the pole on my bandsaw. Yeah, I have turned my bandsaw over and put it on rails. I guess you can call it a sliding bandsaw. It is no problem splitting the pole in half, and without a bandsaw I probably would have used a handsaw, or maybe a table saw, or my chainsaw, or splitting it with an axe and wedges. Yes, you can do that. I'm turning the whole thing upside down for assembly, and I'll glue and screw the rails together, and I'll mount the legs on them with more glue and more screws.
next thing we need to do is add some extra support for our bench top. And you do that by adding these noggins. Let us fit in like that.
For the support, I'll need to go diving into my reclaimed wood pile, and I found some usable rafters from pallets and shipping boxes.
Shelf down here.
I found an old beat-up dining table at the roadside, and I'm hoping I can use the table base support for support of the lower part of my bench. It's a little long, but I'll just fix that with my good old handsaw. I made the legs a little short so there's space for some casters. This is so heavy, there's no way I can move it around without them later. Alright, I think it's time to get this monster on its feet. Hello?
Jesper, my old Scandinavian scallywag. How are you, mate? It's Shane Conlon.
Who? I don't know anyone with that name.
It's Uncle Knackers from DIY for Knuckleheads. You knucklehead.
Oh, that's Shane.
If I'm right, I think you're building one of my projects right now.
Yeah, I'm building it right now, but how could you possibly know that?
Didn't you just leave me a comment saying that you are literally building it right now?
Yeah, I did, but it's really a bad time.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to offer my help to...
Sorry, I gotta go.
What? Interesting guy. Danish.
The workbench is looking more like a workbench now, but somehow some of the support pallet wood sticks out a bit, so I'll need to adjust some of them with my hand plane. And there you go. It is time to mount the sheet that will make the top surface. And I have this sheet of foam ply I'll try to mount on the base. I noticed that the Mr. Fancy Knuckle DIY guy also glued his top on, but I'll avoid the glue and just mount it with screws. This is in case I'll need to change the top later. Instead of just having one big shelf under the table, I'm planning on filling it up with some drawers. So the first step is mounting some sides so I have something to mount drawers on. I have these old chipboards I got for free from a demolition in my dad's barn. Using a circular saw on old dusty chipboards indoors creates a lot of dust, so I switched to a handsaw for a few cuts. Before long I had 4 vertical sides mounted under the table. You may have been thinking, why is that guy not wearing some proper eye protection? Here's why. This is my current collection of safety glasses. But no more. Because SafeStyle from Australia have sent me these 3 pairs of safety glasses. I have never looked cooler in my own humble opinion. They ship all over the world, and if you want to check them out, there is a link in the description. The weather finally got a little better, and I have moved outside to cut up the old chipboards. All the sides of the drawers are 22 centimeters in height, so I might just cut up all the boards into 22 centimeter strips. I do that with a track saw and a spacer that is 22.1 centimeter long. I can now cut all the strips to length on my miter saw that's got a proper dust collection. From there, it's just making a lot of boxes. For the bottom of the drawers, I have some sheets of plywood from shipping boxes. I could have cut a groove and slided the bottom in, but that takes a few centimeters off the usable height inside the drawer. Instead, I just glue and brad nail it directly to the bottom, and then I'll trim it with a router and a flush trim bit. Easy peasy. I'm not worried that the bottom will fall off, because the old IKEA sliders I'm mounting will attach at the bottom, not the sides. so the plywood bottom will rest safely on the sliders. I'm definitely not a cabinet maker, but somehow I managed to mount 10 drawers under the workbench. I'm not a big fan of the chipboard look, so I'm trying to come up with a plan to make them disappear. I could paint them, but that would just look like painted chipboards. So while I'm waiting for creativity to strike, I am going to Instagram. My mate Tim from the UK is trying to split a log into cookies with a handsaw.
It's actually fairly easy to cut, there's just a lot of it.
Yes! Yeah!
Get in!
This just gave me an idea for the workbench. I could cover the drawers with cookies. I have a handsaw and I have a log. I'm going to do my own splitting. Hey, but wait. It took him 4 hours. And after all that work, it's gonna take me days to cut all those cookies.
Remember, Jesper? You're the guy with the sliding bandsaw. You've got to use that to your advantage.
Then I suddenly remembered, I have a sliding bandsaw. What if I could mount the log vertically in the saw and use that?
What a top little project!
Yeah, so I'll just see if Uncle Naggers has some final words of wisdom I can use on my workbench.
I've left a list in the description box down below of the materials and some of the dimensions
Wait,
for this
what?
project.
That sounded like plans. Did you have plans for this on your website all the time?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jesper from Jesper Makes. One day my wife asked me to do something meaningful in my workshop, one being cleaning up the mess and two, make her a coffee table. So I figured why not do both at the same time, and this video is all about making a beautiful pallet coffee table from all the pallet blocks I had laying on my floor from pallet dismantling. I looked on YouTube for pallet blocks coffee table, and there was only one video with the subject with 13 views on it, and this guy's take on it was not quite what I was thinking about, so I'll just dive in and try some stupid ideas. I will share all my mistakes, and trust me, I make a lot, so hang on. I wanted to use all different kinds of wood, and also want a random end grain and face grain facing up. This can go wrong in so many ways, but more insight on that later. The blocks have been sitting in my shop for about a year, so they are pretty dry, but some of them are loaded with resin, which would cause issues later. My plan is to start up by gluing all the blocks together, so I'm starting out by making a big puzzle out of the different blocks that apparently came from as exotic places such as China, South Africa, Turkey, Canada, USA, Ukraine, Sweden, and many other sponsors to this table. This is going to be a complicated glue up, and I'm trying to decomplicate it a bit by gluing the two long sides first. That will make it possible to add some clamping pressure from all sides, while the blocks stay in shape.
Go.
All the blocks are different sizes, and the job now is to end up with a massive wood block. After gluing the end pieces, it's time to glue it all together. The opening time of my wood glue is about half an hour, but the temperature is high and there's a lot of sides to glue together, so I'm working as fast as I can. One of the questions I always get from non-woodworkers about wood glue is it strong enough to just glue wood together, and don't you need screws and nails to hold it together also? If you're wondering about this too, the answer is coming up shortly. While the glue dries, a big shout out to Mark Dana from Australia. Mark makes everything from pallet wood. He's very creative, and if you're into recycled wood, I have linked his channel in the description. Make sure you go and check out Dynamite on YouTube after you have watched this video. The next day I'm very excited to see the result, and the glue up worked out as planned. The glue alone makes this tabletop more than stable enough, and if the blocks had been all the same size, there wouldn't be all these gaps and holes between the blocks. I'm making a very simple mold for this next step. I plan to pour black epoxy resin into the cracks, gaps and nail holes of the blocks. And to stop it from leaking out from the bottom, I'm wrapping it in plastic film and duct tape. This is a deep pour epoxy resin from Entropy. If you plan to do any epoxy pours, my tips would be making sure to get the mixing ratio right and mix it way longer than you think. I'm using a paint mixer drill attachment, and even for this small bucket I'm spending on the good side of 5 minutes with the mixer running. Make sure there's not any unmixed epoxy at the bottom or along the sides of your buckets. Unmixed epoxy simply won't cure properly. And for some reason I thought the small cracks and gaps wouldn't soak up so much epoxy, but I was very wrong on that. So I ordered some bigger buckets with epoxy and waited almost a month to do the second and third pour here. This epoxy takes about 3 days to cure, and a week before you can start working on it. So while it cures, Vic from Down Under Woodworks does some amazing woodworking projects, including building his own machines and this badass wooden bike. James from Fixit Fingers does tool reviews, jigs and fixing stuff. Mind Matter Create is all about mixing and turning epoxy. Links to these channels in the description. I highly recommend them all. The moment of truth. Did my mold hold the epoxy inside or did it leak? There was a small leak, but not too bad. A tip, just pour a little epoxy to begin with and let it cure and close off any leaks at the bottom of the project. Then make the big pour and fill all the gaps up. I needed to flatten it and I don't have a thicknesser wide enough to run a tabletop through it, so I'll just quickly construct a jig so I can use my router to flatten it. The flattening went well, and after some sanding I decided to start the finishing already. Too soon though. My plan was to keep the rustic look of the pallet blocks, and I tried to add that with some wood burning. I burned a lot of wood for the simple reason that it protects the wood and it looks great in many cases. However, when burning an epoxy table, the epoxy will get soft again if you heat it too much too long. Don't do that. Another mistake I made here was I tried to finish the burnt and sanded tabletop with just one big layer of furniture lacquer, and it just didn't look the way I wanted it to. The burning made it look too dark with the lacquer on, and I would really like to be able to see the different kinds of wood the table is made of. After a week or so I sanded it all down again, and I mixed a cup of epoxy resin and started filling up the remaining small gaps, cracks and nail holes.
People say I need to get a little action. People say my love life is fiction. People say I wouldn't give them no satisfaction. Well, I wouldn't know, it's beyond my imagination. I keep my pants up high and my zipper closed, and people wonder why I never get rid of those awesome looking sunglasses that I got off of eBay at a special price. Anyway, you get the picture right. People love to hate a play no matter wrong or right. What I like makes no difference as they go. Oh, get a life. I go. Yeah, I go. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, go. No matter what you people say, I'm gonna do my thing my way. No matter what you people do, I'm gonna do my thing much better than you. No matter what you say or do, oh boy, you're out of luck. It's gonna roll right off of me like water off the back of a duck. And I go, yeah, I go. Yeah, 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 I go.
Yeah, g'day. Welcome to Suno's Projects.
My neighbor was cleaning up his garden and he gave me these logs. Most of them are poplar. I often get logs for free, and the one I'm moving right here is a pear log. By the way, the tool I'm using is a homemade cant hook or log peavy, and it's really essential if you need to move logs. In Denmark, poplar wood is mostly considered trash wood, so it's easy to get it for free. I'm using the cant hook to lift the log so I can get a chain under it. Another essential tool to move logs is the homemade log arch I show you here. And if you're interested in that, I have another video linked in the top of the screen. And in case you're wondering, those are vines, and you can already see that grapes are formed. So this next part I'm pretty excited about. I have been yapping about it in previous videos, and it is finally here. My head bandsaw, or horizontal bandsaw as I like to call it. This is one of the first cuts I'm making on this saw, so bear with me for being a little unexperienced. I also installed a pulley over the saw, so I really don't know why I lifted it by hand. I can already imagine what the comments are gonna look like, and yes, most people do not have a horizontal bandsaw in their shed. There are many ways to mill lumber for log furniture, and before the bandsaw I used my chainsaw to mill lumber. I don't make a lot of money during the pandemic, and I have been working and saving really hard to be able to get this saw. And also this is a small model and really not that expensive. If you have access to logs, it's a brilliant way to be able to turn logs into usable lumber for your wood projects. And a ton of other uses. So let me know if you have any ideas in the comments. This is with an electric motor. It's very silent, and outside the shed you can't really hear it. This model can cut up to 55 cm wide boards, so my biggest log will need to be trimmed down before I can cut them on the bandsaw. This log is no problem for the saw, and I'm aiming at getting 3 big slabs out of it. This log is very fresh, and ideally I should let the slabs dry for a year before using them. But this is going to be outdoor furniture, and I'm going to experiment with using fresh wood and let it dry while we're sitting on it having campfires. And no, I'm not going to tell the brand of my saw or the specific model. That's a secret that will stay with me forever, so please don't ask. I'm planning to make 5 log benches, 1 long and 4 shorter ones, so I'll need to cut 2 of the slabs in half. So after debarking the slabs, I start on the joinery. And joinery on log furniture is more or less just drilling some holes to hammer legs into. So I pull out my 2-inch auger drill bit and start drilling some holes. Auger drill bits are spiral-shaped drill bits that are designed to create clean, deep holes into wood. The sharp spurs at the tip guides the bit into the weed and ensuring the hole is smooth and uniform all the way through. It is not this 2-inch auger drill bit that caused my very cheap drill to lose the grip of things. It seemed to be handling these holes just fine, but problems will arise soon enough. For the legs I'm just grabbing some poplar branches, and I'm using a 2-inch tenon cutter to cut the tenons on the legs. After cutting 4 tenons, my Einhell drill got very hot and started to smoke, so I grabbed another drill. It also got very hot, and I decided to stop and cut the rest of the tenons in my shop with a corded drill. But due to the high RPM of the corded drill, The tenon cutter itself got very hot, and at this point I went looking for a new, powerful, low-geared, high-torque drill. Due to my drill problems, I continued to make 3 benches on camera, and I will leave the 2 for later. My now dead Einheld drill had a torque of 60 Nm and no automatic overload shutdown feature. I found a 40-volt drill with a torque of 160 Nm, and I cut the tenons for the remaining 2 benches after this video was shot with absolutely no issues. If you have seen any of my videos, you know my favorite method of treating wood for the outdoors is by burning it. Bugs, fungus and moisture hates the charred burnt wood. Burnt wood is even more resistant to catch on fire, and it's a natural, safe way to treat wood. And it will last a long time. I treat the bottom of the legs with linseed oil to make them more resistant of rot and moisture. I'm burning the top of the bench until it's black. Then I brush it gently with some sandpaper. Then I pre-treat it with linseed oil. After the oil has soaked in, I gently heat up some of my beeswax mixture. I will link a video about the beeswax mix in the description. But in short, it's beeswax mixed with linseed oil and some mineral spirits. This makes the surface of the bench completely water resistant for many years, and I have used the beeswax on all my outdoor tables, benches and chairs, and none of them show any sign of decay. The secret to getting a hard, durable wax finished surface is treating it with a metal polishing disc a few hours after you have applied the mixture. This will harden it. And it will be interesting to see if this works on fresh wood and how it will develop over the next years. If you got any value from this so far, please make sure you are subscribed and I will update you on how this works long term. Here's one of the things I like the most. I got a letter from a good friend in Turkey. I will let Mehmet explain what his channel name means, but I know he's a very creative and productive maker, and his channel is full of original ideas on how to use reclaimed materials, how to organize your shop, and how to make tools. Follow the link and give his channel a closer look. And thank you, Mehmet, for sending me your sticker. The only thing left now is inviting family and friends to celebrate Midsummer in Denmark around the bonfire. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.